why did we specifically wait till the indigenous vaccines were released to start the vaccination process? Shouldn't we have started the inoculation by importing the vaccines from December itself?
Yes, so I think on vaccines, one thing is very important to understand that normally it can take years and years to develop a vaccine. In fact, there are many diseases, common diseases like adult tuberculosis, like dengue, like malaria. Till today, we don't have a proper vaccine for these, despite years of research. So, what we have managed to do with COVID is, in fact, very, very fast tracked, is very accelerated. And I'm not saying we as in just India, but I'm saying as a global scientific community, what we have managed to pull off with the COVID vaccine is actually in very quick time. And that is because we put our collective, might and investment and resources behind it. And that is perhaps why we managed to come up with these vaccines very quickly. Now, for India, there were many considerations. One is, of course, that you need to make sure that there is a strong, scientific evidence base. In fact, when we gave approval to Covaxin, our indigenous vaccine, a lot of people questioned that maybe you have given premature approval. So actually, a lot of people questioned us that have you given approval too early, right? So I think, therefore, in a crisis, it's a very fine balance for any government, for any drug regulator. You want to get the vaccine out quickly because you know it will save lives, but you also want to make sure that you have enough data and enough data in your setting. XYZ vaccine might work well abroad, but it might not work in the Indian context. So we do need evidence which is India specific. And I think that is what which people actually see as a delay, but perhaps it was just the scientific process taking its course. And I think for Pfizer, for instance, people must remember that it requires storage at minus 70 degrees. Now, very few places in a country like India, you can actually store a vaccine at minus 70 degrees. So it's not very suitable for scaling up. And this is not just specific to Pfizer, this is true for various vaccines, which might require very sophisticated storage facilities, or which might require certain systems which you can pull off maybe in a highly developed, small European country, but you might not be able to pull off in India. So what I'm trying to say is that apart from the scientific considerations, regulators, government in a country like India also need to think about the applicability of the vaccine to the Indian context. Can we store it here? Can we distribute it here? Can we scale it up here? All these questions also come before us. So I think that is what I would say to that. Yes, now when we look back in hindsight, I think it's very natural for people to ask this question, that could we have started vaccination earlier? But I just want to put out those caveats and those constraints, both on the scientific side as well as trying to implement such a large vaccination program in a very diverse country like India, where your temperature conditions are so variable, you don't have those kind of sophisticated storage facilities everywhere. It is genuinely very, very challenging. So I think that is why the kind of vaccines which were available in December, which were very, few ones like, Pfizer and, later Moderna, etc., became available. Therefore, there was some hesitation to immediately bring these in. And also, I think those vaccines, the companies themselves were not very sure that they can immediately come to India. So even the discussions with them were such that they said, okay, maybe we can come by June this year or July this year, but it was not clear that they can actually immediately also come in December. So I think there were various factors at play as to why we didn't immediately import the vaccines at that stage. Today, of course, we are in a very different position. And so now the government has actually given approval, emergency authorization to vaccines which have been approved in the US or in Europe or in Japan. But that is because today we are, in a situation where we have this massive surge. We have to attack it on a war footing. So now the decisions are obviously a little different. But in December, the context was also a little different. A view that the health minister has also publicly expressed, that there was a lot of states which were saying that we want more flexibility, when it comes to vaccines. We want to have a greater say in the procurement, and who do we give it to, who should be prioritized, etc., etc. So I think that is where you have seen this new vaccine approach, where 50% of the doses the center will still procure and provide to the state. So that 50% is not going to go away anywhere. The remaining 50% is where the states have been given flexibility, that you can actually negotiate with the manufacturers directly. You can come up with your own, pricing arrangements. And we've also brought in the private sector, because I think it's very clear that in a country like India, when you're trying to immunize so many people so quickly, we need all the powers to come together. So we also had to involve the private sector, right? So, that is where that additional flexibility was also built in. But that is for that remaining 50%. I think the 50% that the center will continue to provide to states, that stays. That is not going away anywhere. It is the other half where the flexibility has been given to states. So as I said, you can argue this both ways. You can say that why have you given that, flexibility to states? The center should have continued to control everything. But there's another argument which says that, in a federal structure like India, the center cannot control everything and has to also bring in states in a bigger way. So I think these are the complexities of handling a pandemic in a federal structure. I think that is something that I think I want to put out. Because, often we say that Vietnam has done such a good job, Thailand has done such a good job. Let's not forget that they are almost unitary forms of government. They don't deal with the complexities of a federal structure. They are, of course, much smaller populations, but leaving that aside, they are almost centrally controlled. And I think in India, we over several months, we saw many more calls from people that you should decentralize, you should give more power to states. And I think, as I said, we can argue both ways. There can be pros and cons. And in hindsight, especially when we look at it, we can always say that no, maybe the center should have controlled, maybe you shouldn't have put it on states, etc. But these are all up for debate. I think why the center did it, the center's position has been officially stated, that it is because there was an ask for flexibility in all aspects, including vaccination. But it is not to be mistaken that the center will not play a role now in vaccination. It will continue to play a role. It will continue to provide its 50% of doses to states. It will continue to provide free vaccination in its own facilities to people above 45 years of age. Center will continue to play a very big role in boosting manufacturing supply across the country, whether it is increasing the capacity of our two existing manufacturers, Bharat Biotech and the Serum Institute, whether it is bringing in Sputnik. In fact, just today, the Sputnik rollout has started in the country. Whether it is bringing in additional vaccines, whether it is investing further in research and development. We are actually hoping that by the end of the year, we should have not just 3 vaccines, but we should have 6 or 7 vaccines, which are available to people. And when that happens, you can imagine that the pricing will also come down a lot. If 6, 7 vaccines are out in the market, people have a lot more choice. The prices will come down further. So it's not to be said that the center is withdrawing at all from this vaccination process or from anything. It is continuing and will continue to play a big role in various facets of the vaccine program. But yes, the sharing of the doses, the split between center and states, the giving the flexibility to states, I understand. These are questions which can be argued both ways. And as I said, I'm not here to defend or attack anybody. But I am just putting forward, a sort of a perspective from both points of view. And also as a public health, professional who's trying to think about how do you manage this pandemic in the federal structure. A lot of these are questions that I also grapple with. But I think that is what we need to understand. And I think the pricing, of course, that is why the government is also pushing that we need to bring down the pricing as much as possible. Because as I said, we are in a public health emergency. The biggest goal of the government right now is to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible. So everything we can do for that, whether it's bringing in new vaccines, boosting existing supply, boosting research and development to, create maybe easier to give vaccines like the nasal spray. If we get a nasal spray for COVID, in the latter part of the year, that could be a game changer. So government is continuing to also invest in those research and development efforts. And we don't know in a few months from now, if you have a nasal spray, for instance, then you don't need a needle, you don't need a syringe. It can be given very quickly to people, very cheaply to people. It can also perhaps help to cut down transmission. of the virus from one to the other, as opposed to just preventing severe disease in an individual. So I would say that, let's be optimistic about this. Let's be hopeful that even in 2-3 months from now, on vaccination, we should see a much, much better picture. And I think the center and states have to work together on this, and have to make it work together along with the private sector, because we can't leave our private sector out of such a big effort. We are trying to implement one of the largest vaccination programs in the world, so we have to bring every possible stakeholder into it. So yeah, I mean, I realize I've given a little more context than your question asked for, but I just wanted to put everything out there so that people have a more comprehensive understanding.
Yes, thank you so much for that, ma'am. So if I were to put it in perspective, can we say that the reason center is asking for the reduction of prices, or the reason there is a discrepancy in prices between state and center, is because the center already has to provide 50% of the vaccines to states free of cost, and that is why it's asking for a lower price for itself and a higher price for the states?
Yeah, I mean, the states are free to negotiate, is basically the point, for their 50%. They can also negotiate a lower price, a different price. It's just the flexibility which is there for the remaining 50%. So I think the principle here is of flexibility and decentralization for the remaining 50% doses. But the 50% the center will anyway continue to provide. That does not change. The only flexibility angle, whether it comes to pricing, whether it comes to guidelines, if a state decides that for us a priority of certain types of groups has to be there for vaccination, they can do that. They don't have to now go just by the central guideline. So I think the flexibility has come in procurement, in guidelines, and that is the principle of why the center has done it. We can of course, as I said, argue both ways. There's a lot of difference of opinion and there's a lot of different views, but that is the principle behind why it was done.
All right, ma'am. Now that the vaccine pricing for the state and center has been well decided, uh, do you think that it is right to open the vaccination for 18 plus people without completely checking for side effects in the long run?
Yeah, so again, this comes back to the answer I was giving initially, that normally a scientific process of vaccine development, drug development could take several years normally, right? But we are not in a normal situation, and so that is the trade-off that we are having to make, between making sure that we have enough credibility, because of course, I don't think there is any regulator in the world which wants to put out a vaccine or a drug for its population without having enough credible data. So I think that is something that nobody would want to do. And certainly in India, we are not wanting to do that either. But the factor we have to balance it against is speed, because if we say that I will keep waiting for data for 1 year, for 2 years, then I cannot even provide the vaccine to people, and I might end up losing many more precious lives, in the meantime. So these are trade-offs. I mean, as I said, I come from a scientific background. So for me, I myself would keep questioning a vaccine or a drug, that do we have enough data? Because that's how I am trained to think. Do we have enough data on efficacy, on safety? But we have to realize that in a pandemic, it gets balanced out with the speed at which you need to get it to people. And right now, the fact that we are in the middle of this surge where we are also seeing young people getting affected, it's not just older people, but there are also younger people who are getting affected. It was important to open up the vaccination process. On side effects, I would say that now we have fairly good data, actually, beyond the data that we had just from the trials. Now that the vaccines have been administered to millions of people in our own country, and we are actually tracking, a lot of those side effects, etc. By and large, those are very mild side effects so far, thankfully. There are certain people who have had more serious reactions, or there have been certain fatalities, but we are looking at the evidence, that is it actually linked to the vaccine, or is it linked to something else, because the person might have had some underlying condition, might have had some other issue, but those are very few. Those are very, very few. For the vast majority, the vaccines are well tolerated. You don't have any severe side effects. So I would say to people that right now, if you are eligible for a vaccine, don't be hesitant. Don't be hesitant. Go out, get it. Don't worry whether it's Covaxin or Covishield or Sputnik or don't worry about that, because all these vaccines have gone through as rigorous as possible in this time frame, an evaluation of both safety as well as efficacy. But also, people should remember that this is a live process. We will not stop tracking. We will continue to track. As the vaccines are given to more people, we will continue to track. And if something very serious or alarming comes up, we will take action. As I said, no regulator, no government will keep giving a vaccine or a drug when you have sufficient evidence that it's actually going to harm people, more than do good. So that will not happen. But as of now, whatever evidence we have is very good. The safety profile is generally very good. These are generally very well tolerated. So I would say that opening up from a demand perspective is completely the right decision, because young people are also involved now. Even in young people, we are seeing oxygen saturation dropping, people getting pneumonia, people landing up in ICUs. I think all of us would have heard of very young people, becoming very serious with this disease and also losing their lives. So we have to open it up for all young people. In fact, we might need to even look at vaccination of children, not so far in the future. And I think that is something the world is now looking at very seriously, and so are we, because increasingly we are finding small children are also getting affected. That is something we did not see so much the first time around. So I think from the demand side, it's completely the right decision. Now we just have to boost up our supply to match this demand. I think that is really the crux of the challenge we have right now.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.